What do I mean by super forecasting? In order to actually talk about this, I need to back way up. And believe it or not, I actually have to talk about the United States intelligence community. When I talk about the US intelligence community to folks outside Washington, they usually say, do you mean the CIA? And I say, yes, I mean the CIA and the 16 other intelligence agencies, which are collectively known as the intelligence community. All those agencies report up to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence is a very important post, oversees this intelligence community with an annual budget in excess of $50 billion. They use a huge portion of that funding to pay for forecasts about big, important things that really matter, right? It's the forecasting that informs decision-making in the White House. So how good is that forecasting? Answer, they don't know. Lots of people have lots of opinions, but they don't know because it's never been scientifically tested. Is it as good as it could be? Could it be made better? They don't know. They don't know. And fortunately, a few years ago, some officials within the ODNI said, that's not acceptable. We need to do better. And one of the ways in which they sought to do better was they wanted to sponsor a forecasting tournament. Now, when I say tournament, people think it's a game. It's not a game. It's a huge research program. And in this case, what it meant was the officials within the ODNI would go to university-based researchers, the leading researchers in forecasting, and say to them, you create a team to make forecasts. You use any methods you want to make these forecasts, and we will ask you the questions. We will ask you to make these, answer these, resolve these forecasting challenges. And so they would be questions, which the sort of thing that the intelligence community has to answer all the time. Big important stuff like, will Russia seize the Crimea? What will happen to the Chinese economy in the fourth quarter? So big, important, real world questions. And so there ended up being 5 university-based research teams in this forecasting tournament. It went on for 4 years. And so that gives you some sense of the scale. But to really get it, picture this. One of those teams, just one of those 5 teams, was something called the Good Judgment Project. And that was headed by my co-author, Philip Tetlock. And the methods that were used by the Good Judgment Project relied primarily upon volunteer forecasters. So they went out into the community, they went to blogs and so on, and they said, hey, do you want to spend a little of your spare time forecasting geopolitical questions? And they signed up a lot of people, and they had these volunteers answer a lot of questions. How many people? Between 2,800 and 3,000 people were involved at any one time. Over the course of the 4 years, more than 20,000 volunteers made forecasts for the Good Judgment Project. So that's a really big, it gives you a sense of the big scale that we're talking about here. So what happens? What's the upshot? The upshot is, of course, the Good Judgment Project wins, hands down, wins by a country mile. Now, there's all sorts of findings that come out of the Good Judgment Project. It's very complex stuff because it is itself an enormous research program. But for our purposes, the single most important finding is this. There was a very small percentage of the people who were making these forecasts who were extremely good forecasters, 1 to 2%, extremely good forecasters, and consistently so. I emphasize consistently, right? Anybody can win the lottery once. Luck, it's pretty awesome. But if you are consistently making accurate forecasts, you're probably looking at skill more than luck. So these people are awesome forecasters. How awesome? Well, at the beginning of this program, the ODNI set benchmarks, performance benchmarks. And the researchers who were involved said, these benchmarks are way too ambitious. Nobody's going to be able to do this. And guess what happened? The super forecasters blew past them. The super forecasters beat prediction markets, something that economists would say is not possible, but they did. And the super forecasters beat the intelligence analysts themselves, the people who had access to the classified information that is produced by all that $50 billion budget. Pretty amazing stuff. So then the question is, how do they do it?